I checked the gauges on the Nereus as our descent into the Pacific began. The digital readouts showed all systems operating normally, hull integrity at 100%, oxygen levels stable, power reserves full. Everything looked good, exactly what I wanted to see at the start of a dive. "Starting our drop to 2,000 meters, I said, keeping my voice steady as I eased the vessel downward. "How's everyone doing?" This job paid 3 times my old Navy salary, which made the risk worth it. My oldest, Jamie, had just started her 3rd year at UCLA, and my son would be following her to college next fall. Their mother had made it clear I'd be covering tuition, so here I was, taking private salvage contracts that paid more than my military pension ever would. "Depth at 200 meters and descending," Ryder called out from his station. His voice carried the same methodical calmness it always did, one of the reasons I'd requested him for 6 dives now. He knew his equipment inside and out, never got rattled, and could fix almost anything that broke underwater. Becky tapped her console, studying the sonar display. No underwater currents detected in our descent path. Thermal readings normal for this depth. She adjusted her glasses. I'd only worked with her twice, but her reputation as a marine biologist was impressive. Her knowledge of deep-sea ecosystems had proven valuable on previous dives. "What exactly was this drone doing when it went offline?" I asked, keeping my eyes on our trajectory. The mission brief had been surprisingly light on details. Becky glanced up from her monitor. "Collecting samples near a hydrothermal vent field. It's an experimental model with specialized collection arms, worth about $4 million. The company can't afford to lose it." That explained the generous payment for a supposedly routine retrieval. $4 million sitting on the ocean floor meant someone's job was on the line. "We're passing 400 meters, Ryder reported. "All systems nominal. Hull pressure within expected parameters." I nodded, watching the water outside our viewport grow darker with each meter we descended. "We'll need about 40 minutes to reach target depth. Everyone stay sharp." The cockpit filled with a blue glow as natural light faded. The pressure outside increased, but inside our reinforced hull we stayed comfortable, if cramped. The Nereus wasn't built for luxury, just functionality and survival. At 800 meters, we passed through a school of lanternfish, their lights flashing as they scattered from our beams. The sight never got old, even after years of deep dives. Each tiny light cut through the darkness around us. "Enjoying the light show?" I asked, glancing at Becky, who was recording the encounter on her tablet. "Always," she replied without looking up. "That's Diaphis Theta. They don't usually school this densely at this depth. Interesting adaptation." Ryder chuckled. "You'll have to excuse Becky. She gets excited about fish the way most people get excited about sports teams." "Just doing my job," she responded, but I caught the slight smile on her face. As we passed the 1,000-meter mark, the water outside was a cold 40 degrees, while we stayed at 68 inside the submersible. I wiped the condensation off the viewports with my sleeve. 1,200 meters, Ryder called out, adjusting ballast to compensate for increased pressure. I felt the subtle shift as the Nereus rebalanced itself. "How's that drone signal looking?" "Getting stronger," Becky reported, studying her display. "I estimate it's about half a kilometer east of our current position. The topography data suggests it's in some kind of depression or ravine." "Understood. I'll adjust our approach vector." At 1,500 meters, I turned on the flood lamps, cutting through the darkness. The beams revealed jagged rock formations rising from the seafloor, covered with colorful deep-sea anemones and sponges. In the distance, a sheer cliff face dropped into a deep canyon. "That's the Mid-Pacific Ridge extension," Becky explained, pointing toward the cliff. "This whole area is geologically active. Those formations were created by underwater volcanic activity over thousands of years. The drone's homing beacon grew stronger on our instruments, pulling us toward a narrow ravine that cut between two massive rock walls. As I guided the Nereus closer, something about the location made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'd learned to trust that feeling during my years in the Navy. It had kept me alive more than once. "Pretty tight quarters ahead," I said, masking my concern with professional detachment. "Ryder, keep an eye on our clearance. Becky, any unusual readings from inside that ravine?" "Nothing significant," she replied after a moment. "Some thermal fluctuations, but that's expected near the ridge. Sonar shows adequate clearance for our hull, though we'll need to take it slow." I nodded and kept walking, but the uneasiness remained. The ravine opened up like the mouth of a giant beast. The rock walls on either side were lined with odd curved shapes that looked like teeth. Just nerves, I told myself. Just the usual deep-sea paranoia that hit everyone eventually. But as we neared the ravine, the feeling intensified. Something was off about this place. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it deep down. Still, we had a job to do, and I kept these thoughts to myself as we continued our descent into the darkness. I spotted it immediately when Becky pointed toward the viewport. The drone we'd come for, half buried in the ocean floor silt. Its metallic blue casing reflected our floodlights, making it stand out against the murky sea floor. "Good eye, Becky," I said, easing the Nereus closer. The drone was a cylindrical device about 6 feet long, designed for deep water exploration. Several of its propellers were visibly bent, and the entire front sensor array looked damaged. There's our $4 million piece of equipment. I maneuvered our submersible directly above the target, careful not to kick up too much sediment with our thrusters. The ravine walls loomed on either side of us, creating a claustrophobic channel that made precise positioning tricky. "Ryder, prep the manipulator for retrieval," I instructed, keeping my hands steady on the controls. "Let's grab this thing and get back to the surface." Ryder nodded, unbuckling his safety harness with practiced efficiency. He moved to the control station on the port side of the cabin, his fingers dancing across the panels as he activated the external systems. "Extending arm now," he said, voice calm as always. Hydraulic pressure nominal. Through the viewport, I watched the mechanical appendage unfold from the Nereus's undercarriage, articulated joints moving with deliberate precision. The metal claw at its end opened wide, positioning itself above the partially buried drone. "Little more to the left," Ryder muttered, eyes fixed on his control screen. "Almost there." The claw descended slowly, disturbing the fine silt around the drone. That's when I noticed something odd. The sediment wasn't settling the way it should. There was another disturbance pattern, separate from what our manipulator was causing. "Hold up," I said, leaning closer to the viewport. "Something's not right with the silt movement down there." Ryder paused the arm's descent, glancing up. "What do you mean?" "It's not just our disruption," I explained, pointing to an area about 20 feet beyond the drone where the seafloor seemed to ripple slightly. "Something else is moving the sediment. Something big." Becky immediately turned to her station. Checking sonar now. The mechanical claw hovered above the drone as we tensed. Years of underwater operations had taught me to trust my instincts, and right now, every one of them was sending warning signals. "Becky?" I prompted, not taking my eyes off the viewport. Her voice was tight with concern. "I'm picking up a large mass approaching fast from the eastern ravine. It's..." She paused, adjusting her console. "Eddie, this can't be right. Whatever this is, it's too big to be any normal predator in these waters." Just as the words left her mouth, I saw it. a massive shape at the edge of our flood lamps. I could only make out its outline, but that was enough to send ice through my veins. The creature had huge flippers propelling it through the water, and its long head tapered to a snout filled with teeth I could see clearly, even from this distance, each one longer than my arm. "What the hell is that?" Ryder whispered, his usual composure cracking. The creature shot toward us with incredible speed, closing the gap faster than seemed possible for something its size. Its massive body twisted with sinuous grace, despite being easily 40 feet long. Becky's voice rose in panic. "It's a Kronosaurus, a marine reptile from the Cretaceous period." Her training kicked in even as fear filled her words. "It can't be. They've been extinct for 100 million years." I didn't waste time questioning how a prehistoric monster could be alive in these depths. I released the drone immediately, letting it drop back to the seafloor as I slammed my hand onto the emergency thruster controls. "Brace yourselves," I shouted, firing the high-powered backup engines designed for rapid maneuvers. But even as the Nereus lurched upward, I knew with sickening certainty that we'd reacted too late. The Kronosaurus closed the final distance with a powerful thrust of its massive flippers, jaws opening wide to reveal rows of conical teeth designed for crushing. The impact came like a freight train. Our submersible spun wildly as the Kronosaurus slammed into our port side, throwing me against my harness. Metal groaned around us as the Nereus tumbled through the water. I fought the controls, trying to stabilize us while warning lights lit up the console like a Christmas tree. A piercing alarm cut through the chaos. Hull breach. A spray of icy seawater shot into the cabin from a crack near the ceiling, misting the air. "Breach in Sector 3, I yelled, fighting to keep my hand steady on the controls. Before I could say anything else, the submersible lurched again. From the corner of my eye, I saw Ryder, who hadn't managed to get back to his seat, fly across the cabin. His body crashed against the starboard wall, his head connecting with a pressure valve. The sound was unmistakable. A wet crack, followed by silence. Ryder slid down the wall, leaving a dark smear of blood behind him. He crumpled to the floor, eyes open but seeing nothing, a pool of red spreading beneath his head. "Oh God! Ryder!" Becky unbuckled herself, scrambling toward the storage compartment. "I'm getting the first aid kit." "No!" I barked, harsher than I meant to. "He's gone, Becky. Look at his eyes." She froze, turning toward Ryder's still form. The truth sank in as she stared at his unmoving chest, the unnatural angle of his neck. "But we can't just..." "We don't have time." I cut her off, my voice breaking. "That thing is coming back. Get in your seat now." I looked through the viewport at the water. The floodlights illuminated the massive shape circling about 50 yards out. The Kronosaurus moved smoothly, its flippers pushing it through the water as it prepared for another attack. "It can't be real," Becky whispered, buckling herself in with shaking hands. "It's impossible." "Real enough to kill Ryder," I said, watching the creature circle for another attack. "That thing is at least 15 meters long. Those jaws could crush us." I pushed the throttle forward, feeling the engine strain. Bubbles and dark fluid, hydraulic fluid, streamed past our viewport. The Nereus shuddered, wounded but still moving. "Where are we going?" Becky asked, wiping water from her face as another spray shot from the ceiling breach. I banked hard to the right, toward a series of narrow underwater canyons I'd spotted on our approach. "Those ravines. We can't outrun this thing in open water. It's too fast, too powerful." The creature sensed us and changed direction, slicing through the water with alarming speed. Its eyes followed us, revealing a sharp intelligence in every move. "The canyons are our only shot," I said, pushing the engines harder. If we can get into the tight spaces, maybe it can't follow. Too big. The readouts showed damage to several systems. Water sprayed into the cabin as the breach widened. Every indicator light on the main console flashed red or amber. Nothing was working. Eddie, the oxygen recycler is failing, Becky reported, her voice steadier now, professional training kicking in despite the horror. And we're losing pressure in the ballast tanks. I felt the main propulsion system starting to give out, a subtle vibration becoming a violent shudder. The submersible lurched forward unevenly, no longer responding properly to the controls. We were leaving a trail behind us. Bubbles, fluid, debris. Easy for the predator to follow. The first canyon entrance loomed ahead, a narrow crack between two towering underwater cliffs. Behind us, the Kronosaurus closed the distance with powerful strokes of its flippers, jaws opening to reveal rows of conical teeth. "Hold on!" I yelled, wrestling with the controls. The Nereus struggled forward, its damaged systems protesting every command. We were bleeding speed, the engines failing more with each second. I pushed them anyway, ignoring the warning indicators. The ravine was our only hope. The gap between us and the ancient predator narrowed. Every gauge and system showed critical failure approaching. All I could do was keep us moving forward, fighting to maintain what little speed we had left as the monster bore down on us. I gripped the controls, white-knuckled as we entered the first canyon. The Nereus juddered and fought against my commands, but I'd flown worse in my Navy days. This submersible might be damaged, but it was still responsive enough. I banked hard to port, narrowly missing a jagged rock formation that would have torn through our already compromised hull. "We're going to make it," I said, more to myself than to Becky. The canyon walls loomed on either side, barely visible in our floodlights. I navigated through the tight passage, each turn demanding my full attention. The bulkhead behind me leaked, water pooling at my feet, but I had to push that aside. Ryder's body lay in the corner of the cabin, leaving a dark streak on the floor. I forced myself to focus on the next turn. "Eddie, I think we're losing it," Becky called out, her voice strained as she monitored her station. "It can't follow us through these passages. Too big." I checked the rear cameras. The massive prehistoric creature thrashed at the entrance to the canyon, too large to squeeze through the narrow gap. Its frustration was visible in how it smashed its body against the rock walls, sending clouds of silt billowing through the water. "Good," I muttered, easing the Nereus around another bend. "Let's put more distance between us." The submersible scraped against the canyon wall, making a loud noise in the cabin. I winced, but kept moving, pushing through the underwater maze. Each turn required careful calculation. Too wide and we'd crash into rock. Too tight and we'd lose speed. Becky monitored the sonar display, fingers moving quickly over her console. "There's a thermal vent field about half a kilometer ahead," she said, her voice steady. "But Eddie, hull integrity is below 30%. We're taking on water in 3 sections." I glanced down at my boots. The water had risen to my ankles. "How bad?" "Bad enough," she said, adjusting her glasses which had slipped down her nose. "At this rate, we've got maybe 20 minutes before critical systems start shorting out from water damage." I took in this information as I moved through a narrow section of canyon, the walls close enough to see the rock texture outside the viewport. We entered a wider channel, giving me a moment to think. "We can't surface," I said finally. "Not with this damage. We'd break apart halfway up." "And that thing is still out there," Becky added quietly. "Yeah." I checked our depth. We were still at over 1,000 meters. Even if we could somehow limp to the surface, the Kronosaurus would catch us in open water. We need to find somewhere to set down, maybe call for emergency extraction. A warning light flashed on my console. The rear cameras showed only darkness now. They'd failed. I had no way of knowing if the creature had found another route to follow us. We came out of the narrow passage into a wider part of the underwater canyon. The space opened up, but the floodlights couldn't reach the distant walls. My gut twisted with dread. "Becky, run a full scan. 360 degrees. She was already doing it, her expression tight with concentration. Nothing on sonar yet, but these rock formations could be masking. The impact came from below with such force that I bit my tongue. The Nereus lurched upward, then stopped dead. Through the viewport, I saw it. The Kronosaurus had somehow circled beneath us. Its massive jaws clamped onto the lower section of the submersible, directly into the compartment housing the manipulator controls. Metal shrieked. The entire vessel shuddered violently. I fought with the controls, trying to break free, but the creature's grip was unbreakable. It thrashed its head from side to side, treating the Nereus like a dog with a chew toy. "Becky, hold on to something," I shouted, but it was too late. The violence of the attack tore her from her seat despite her harness. I watched in horror as she hit the ceiling hard, then crashed down onto her control panel when the creature suddenly changed direction. Her head struck the metal edge with a sickening crack. The Kronosaurus gave one final powerful shake, then released us. The Nereus spun wildly. I fought to stabilize it, alarms blaring from every console. When I finally regained some control, I looked over at Becky. She was sprawled across her station, her neck bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. Her eyes were open but unseeing. "Becky!" I called out, reaching toward her though she was too far away to touch. No response, no movement, no rise and fall of her chest. I was alone now, both my crew members dead. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow, but I couldn't afford to process it. Not yet. Not if I wanted to survive. Water was now pouring in from multiple breaches. The control panel flashed with warnings. Oxygen levels dropping, hull integrity critical, engine failure imminent. I pulled back on the throttle, trying to coax more power from the failing systems. Through the viewport, I spotted something in the distance. A field of black smokers, hydrothermal vents releasing superheated water into the ocean. Dark clouds rose, illuminated by the glow of molten material from the Earth's crust. The vent field stretched ahead, a harsh underwater landscape of boiling water and toxic minerals. Normally, we'd avoid such a dangerous area, but these weren't normal circumstances, and I was running out of options. I frantically scanned the console display, trying to make sense of the cascade of warning lights. The Nereus was dying around me. Water seeped in from multiple hull breaches, pooling at my feet. The overhead lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the cabin. Both Ryder and Becky were dead. Ryder's body still lay crumpled in the corner where he'd fallen. Blood spreading beneath him like an accusing finger pointed my way. Becky had never regained consciousness after hitting her head on the control panel. I checked her pulse minutes ago, finding nothing. I was completely alone 2,000 meters below the surface in a failing submersible. "Think, Eddie. Think," I muttered, wiping spray from my face as another seal gave way somewhere overhead. The life support readout showed oxygen levels at 23% and dropping. Hull integrity hovered at critical levels. Main propulsion was offline, with auxiliary power reserves down to 18%. At this rate, I had maybe 30 minutes before total systems failure. But the manipulator arm control station still glowed green, indicating at least partial functionality. I stared at it, a half-formed idea taking shape. During our mission briefing, Captain Torres warned us about this area. The hydrothermal vent field nearby rested on an unstable underwater plateau of volcanic rock that had been weakening for decades. The pressure from the vents had created a geological time bomb. I looked back at my dead colleagues. Becky still sat buckled in her chair, head slumped forward, dark hair falling across her face. She'd been so excited about this dive, pointing out species as we descended. And Ryder, reliable, steady Ryder, who'd worked with me on 6 previous missions without incident. "I'm going to get us out of here," I promised them, though they couldn't hear me. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I was their team leader. I should have turned back the moment we spotted that creature. Instead, I'd pushed forward, convinced we could retrieve that drone and collect our payday. Now they were dead because of my decision. But guilt wouldn't get me to the surface. Survival required action. I pulled up the navigation charts on the secondary screen, studying the underwater terrain around the vents. The largest vent, a black smoker, rose from the seafloor about 50 meters to my left. It spewed superheated water that would instantly cook anything that touched it. Several smaller vents created a minefield of thermal columns around it. The structural weakness appeared to center around the largest vent, where years of heat and pressure had worn away at the supporting rock. If enough force was applied at precisely the right point, a shadow passed beneath us, drawing my attention to the viewport. The Kronosaurus circled below, its massive body moving with surprising grace. I estimated it was at least 40 feet long, with a head the size of a small car. Those ancient eyes tracked the Nereus, watching my every move. This wasn't random predation. The creature was treating this as a territorial challenge. It saw us as intruders and wouldn't stop until we were eliminated. "You don't belong here," I whispered, watching it glide beneath us. "You shouldn't even exist." Yet it did exist, a living fossil that had somehow survived for 100 million years in this isolated pocket of the deep ocean. And now it had killed my crew and damaged my vessel beyond repair. I turned back to the controls, assessing my options. The manipulator arm controls responded when I tested them, though with noticeable lag. The mechanical arm itself appeared damaged but operational based on the external camera feed. It might have enough strength for what I needed. The auxiliary power indicator blinked, reminding me of my dwindling resources. I had one shot at this. If I failed, the Kronosaurus would finish what it started, or I'd die slowly as oxygen ran out. I pulled up the structural analysis of the vent field and compared it to what I saw through the viewport. The largest vent had a boulder near its base that seemed to stabilize that section of the rock shelf. If I could dislodge it with the manipulator arm, the collapse might distract or trap the creature. Through the viewport, I saw the Kronosaurus changing its pattern, swimming tighter circles around the Nereus. It was preparing for another attack. The emergency thrusters showed minimal power, just enough for one quick burst. Not enough to reach the surface, but maybe enough to get clear of a collapsing vent field. I accessed the manipulator arm control station, running a quick diagnostic. The arm responded with a 62% functionality rating, damaged, but usable. The emergency thrusters showed ready, but at low power. Carefully, I began to maneuver the Nereus closer to the largest vent, keeping one eye on the circling predator. The submersible shuddered as I nursed the remaining power from the auxiliary engines. Warning lights continued to flash across the console, but I tuned them out, focusing only on what mattered for the next few minutes. I planned to position the submersible above the vent, use the manipulator arm to dislodge the boulder, trigger the collapse, and fire the emergency thrusters to escape. Hopefully, the Kronosaurus would be caught in the collapse or the eruption of superheated water that followed. It was a desperate plan with slim chances of success, But in my current situation, slim chances were better than none. I gripped the controls tightly as I eased the Nereus into position, preparing for the one desperate maneuver that might either save my life or end it completely. I steered the crippled Nereus closer to the hydrothermal vents, watching as the black smokers shot jets of superheated water into the surrounding ocean. The dark plumes billowed upward like underwater chimneys, creating swirling currents that buffeted against our already damaged hull. Each movement of the controls felt sluggish, resistant, as though the submersible itself was telling me this was a bad idea. Through the viewport, I could make out the massive structures that housed the vents, natural formations built up over centuries from mineral deposits. They looked like strange alien towers rising from the ocean floor. But what caught my attention wasn't their otherworldly appearance, but how unstable they seemed. Large boulders and chunks of rock balanced precariously on narrow shelves, some looking like they might tumble down with the slightest disturbance. This might work, I muttered to myself, glancing back at the still forms of Becky and Ryder. I couldn't dwell on them now, not if I wanted to survive. I shifted my focus to the manipulator arm control station. Most systems were offline, but this one still showed partial functionality. I reached for the joystick controls and powered up the system. The mechanical arm beneath the Nereus jerked to life, moving with stuttering, uncoordinated motions that sent small vibrations through the hull. "Better than nothing," I said, putting it through a basic mobility test. The arm extended outward, its movements shaky but responsive. The hydraulics had taken damage, but they were holding. For now. A shadow passed across the viewport, drawing my attention back to the water beyond. The Kronosaurus was still out there, but it had changed its hunting pattern. Instead of the direct, aggressive approaches it had made before, now it circled at a greater distance, making wide, deliberate passes around the Nereus and the vent field. Its long, streamlined body cut through the water with disturbing grace for something so massive. I could see its eyes, dark, ancient, and far too intelligent, tracking our movements. It was assessing, learning, preparing. The console in front of me flashed with more red warnings than I could process at once. Oxygen levels were dropping steadily, now below 20%. Water pressure alarms were sounding from multiple hull sections. Main power was fluctuating, causing the lights to dim momentarily before emergency backups kicked in. We were dying, this submersible and I, in slow, methodical increments. I turned my attention to the largest of the hydrothermal vents, about 50 meters to our port side. The structure around it was a jumbled mass of rock and mineral formations, but what caught my eye was a massive boulder near its base. From this angle, it looked like that single rock was acting as a keystone, supporting a significant portion of the surrounding shelf. If that boulder moved, an idea formed, desperate and risky, but possibly our only chance. I eased the Nereus forward, fighting the current from the vents that pushed against us. Water leaked steadily from a crack above my head, landing on my shoulder in a cold, rhythmic pattern that matched the pounding of my heart. Carefully, I positioned the submersible directly above the largest vent. The temperature readings spiked dramatically on the external sensors. If the hull failed completely while we were here, the superheated water would boil us alive in seconds. I engaged the manipulator arm again, extending it downward toward the massive boulder. The arm shuddered, struggling to maintain stability in the strong current surrounding the vent. A warning tone pulled my attention back to the external cameras. The Kronosaurus had changed direction. It was no longer circling. Its massive body had turned, and it was now heading straight toward us, powerful tail propelling it forward with frightening speed. "No, not yet," I said, quickly checking the emergency thruster controls. The display showed minimal power reserves. barely enough for one short burst. It would have to be enough. I watched the creatures approach, my hand hovering over the thruster controls, while my other hand gripped the manipulator joystick. Distance, timing, everything would need to be perfectly synchronized. The Chronosaurus closed the gap rapidly. 500 meters, 400, 300. I could see details of its hide now, the ancient scales reflecting the submersible's lights. Its jaws began to open, revealing rows of conical teeth designed for gripping and tearing. I mentally calculated how much time I had left before impact, how long the thrusters would burn, how quickly the manipulator could move that boulder, and whether the resulting collapse would happen fast enough to matter. My fingers tightened on both controls as I tracked the creature's approach, waiting for the precise moment when everything would align, when my desperate plan might actually work. I hovered the Nereus above the largest vent, my fingers poised over the emergency thruster controls. My heart pounded as I stared at the console, watching the critical warnings flash across almost every system. Water still leaked in from multiple breaches in the hull, pooling around my boots. But that wouldn't matter if my plan worked, or if it failed. The manipulator arm extended beneath the submersible, ready to dislodge the boulder I'd spotted. Through the viewport, I saw the mechanical claw shaking. The hydraulics were barely working, but they only needed to last a few more seconds. "Come on," I whispered to myself, the words almost lost in the hiss of escaping air and the constant ping of alarms. Movement in my peripheral vision drew my attention back to the murky water beyond the floodlights. The Chronosaurus had changed course. No longer circling, it was now charging directly toward us, a living torpedo of ancient muscle and teeth cutting through the water with terrifying speed. The creature was massive, its body propelled by powerful flippers that shouldn't exist in this century. Every instinct told me to flee, but the Nereus was too damaged, too slow. Running wasn't an option. I watched the monster's approach, its prehistoric form becoming clearer as it closed the distance. Its elongated head housed rows of conical teeth that could tear through the submersible's hull like paper. Eyes that shouldn't exist anymore fixed on the Nereus with predatory focus. I started counting down the meters in my head as it approached. 300 meters. The creature moved steadily, a deadly predator from the Cretaceous period. 200 meters. I could see the powerful muscles rippling under its skin as it pumped its flippers. 100 meters. I tightened my grip on the controls, my palms slick with sweat. The plan had to work. If it didn't, I'd join Becky and Ryder soon enough. At 50 meters, with the creature's massive jaws opening wide enough to swallow the front section of the Nereus, I made my move. I fired the emergency thrusters and simultaneously drove the manipulator arm deep into the seafloor beside the vent. The submersible lurched upward from the thrust, fighting against its own damaged systems. The manipulator arm dug into the silt, metal fingers closing around the massive boulder. Warnings flashed across the control panel as the hydraulics strained against their limits. I pushed the arm to its maximum extension, feeling the entire submersible shake with the effort. The boulder shifted, then rolled, just as I'd hoped. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The unstable shelf gave way in a chain reaction of falling rock. Boulders tumbled down, creating a widening collapse that spread outward from the vent like a stone avalanche. The vent erupted with a massive plume of superheated water. The water was black with minerals, then clouded with silt, rising with such force that I could see the current pushing against the Nereus. The Chronosaurus was too close, moving too fast to change direction. I pressed my face to the viewport, transfixed by what was happening. The prehistoric predator plunged directly into the collapsing seafloor and the scalding water blast. The creature's body contorted in what could only be pain as superheated water enveloped it. Its massive form twisted and thrashed as tons of rock crashed down around it. Its powerful flippers beat against the water, trying to propel it away from the danger. But more rocks continued to fall, pinning it down. A sound unlike anything I'd ever heard underwater filled the cabin, a scream that vibrated through the water, resonating in my chest. The Nereus shuddered, adding to the blaring alarms. The viewing screen showed temperature readings around the vent spiking well above what any living creature could survive. The Kronosaurus continued to thrash against the rocks that trapped it, but its movements were becoming less coordinated, its body partially buried under the collapsed shelf. I realized I was gripping the controls so tightly that my knuckles were white. I forced myself to loosen my hold as I watched the creature that had killed my crew being crushed in the superheated water. A creature that had survived since the time of the dinosaurs was finally meeting its end because of human technology. The vibrations from the collapse traveled through the water, hitting the Nereus in powerful waves. Warning lights flashed across the console as new breaches formed in the already compromised hull. The submersible shook violently, throwing me against the control panel. I slammed hard against the controls as the shockwave rippled through the water and hit the Nereus. My head smacked the metal panel, and I tasted blood in my mouth. For a moment, I couldn't see straight as the submersible rocked violently. A sickening mechanical groan filled the cabin as the last engine gave out. The console erupted with red warning lights, not just a few isolated alerts, but a Christmas tree of disaster. System after system reported failure. No, 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 I muttered, wiping blood from my lip as I tried to regain control. The Nereus tilted and began to drift, caught in the ocean current. I pulled at the controls, but they were unresponsive. The submersible was now just a metal coffin 2,000 meters below the surface. I wiped condensation from the viewport. Through clouds of silt and debris, I saw the aftermath of what I'd done. The vent field had collapsed, and there, partially buried under boulders, was the Kronosaurus. Its massive body thrashed against the weight pinning it down. One flipper beat against the rocky prison, but it couldn't break free. Not yet. I checked the power readings. Main engines, offline. Navigation systems, failing. Life support, critical. Auxiliary power was down to 12% and falling. We had maybe a few hours of emergency systems left at best. With shaking fingers, I reached for the emergency beacon control panel, still intact on the right side of the main console. I flipped open the protective cover and pressed the activation button. A small green light blinked on, the only good news in this entire disaster. "Come on," I whispered, watching the signal strength indicator. It fluctuated but held steady. The beacon was working, broadcasting our position to any vessels within range. I ran a hand over my face, feeling the slick mixture of sweat and blood. The damage assessment screen showed what I already knew: catastrophic hull breaches in multiple sections, critical system failures across the board, and zero propulsion capability. There was absolutely no way we were getting back to the surface under our own power. The beacon was my only lifeline now. The support vessel Atalanta would be tracking us, and when we failed to make our scheduled check-in, they'd come looking. They'd pick up the beacon signal and send a rescue submersible. That was the plan anyway. That was all I had left to hope for. Water sloshed around my ankles as the Nereus drifted away from the vent field. The cabin was getting colder as the heating systems failed. I shivered and pulled my arms close to my body. I turned in my seat, looking at what remained of my crew. Ryder's body lay crumpled in the corner, the pool of blood around him now diluted by the seawater leaking in. Becky was still slumped over her console, her face peaceful despite the chaos that had claimed her life. They'd signed up for a routine salvage job, retrieve an expensive drone, collect their pay, go home. Instead, they'd found this nightmare. Instead, they'd died. And it was my fault. I was the one who took the contract. I was the one who led the mission. I was the one who survived. "I'm sorry," I said to them, knowing they couldn't hear me. "I'm so sorry." A thought crossed my mind as I looked at the collapsing vent field. How many vessels had vanished in these waters because of that thing? How many teams had faced the Kronosaurus and never returned? The deep ocean held many mysteries, and maybe this was the answer to some of them. The water around my ankles grew deeper. Another seal had given way. I didn't bother trying to patch it. There were too many leaks now, and not enough hands to fix them. Through the viewport, I saw the trapped Kronosaurus, struggling in the distance, its massive body lit by the Nereus's external lights. Even buried under rock and scalded by vent water, it kept fighting. Its head turned toward the submersible, and its eyes found mine. Those eyes, ancient and filled with hatred, locked onto me. This creature wasn't just a predator. It knew what I had done to it. If it ever broke free, I knew it would hunt me until one of us was dead. I sat in the dying submersible, watching the emergency lights flicker like fireflies ready to give up their glow. The power continued to fade, every system ticking down to zero one by one. Each time a light blinked out, the darkness pressed in a little more. Beyond the viewport, I knew it was still out there, the Kronosaurus. Even pinned under tons of rock and scalded by superheated water, I felt certain that if it ever freed itself from its rocky prison, it would hunt me relentlessly. The intelligence I'd seen in those ancient eyes wasn't something that would forget or forgive. The cabin was cold, and my breath came out in puffs. Life support systems failed one after another, each with a quiet alarm that eventually stopped. The temperature control had been one of the first to go. I rubbed my hands together and tucked them under my armpits to keep warm. I leaned forward to check the emergency beacon again, my movements slow in the increasing cold. The small control panel showed a steady green light, still blinking its regular pattern. I tapped the signal strength indicator, watching the needle jump but hold steady. Good. It was still transmitting our location to anyone who might be listening. Right now, that tiny green light was the most valuable thing in my world. My gaze drifted to the still forms of my crew. I couldn't leave them like that. Not Ryder, crumpled in the corner where he'd fallen, or Becky, slumped over her station. They deserved better. I pushed myself up from my seat, wading through the ankle-deep water that now covered the floor of the cabin. The cold bit into my skin as I moved toward the emergency supply locker. The locker door stuck, swollen from water damage. I yanked it twice before it gave way, revealing the bright orange emergency blankets inside. I pulled two out, the mylar crinkling loudly in the quiet cabin. I went to Ryder first. With gentle hands, I straightened his body as best I could, arranging his arms at his sides. I didn't look at his eyes, still open, but seeing nothing. After wiping some of the blood from his face with my sleeve, I carefully wrapped the blanket around him, covering him completely. My hands shook, not just from the cold. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I knew he couldn't hear me. Next, I moved to Becky. She looked almost peaceful, like she might be sleeping. I lifted her gently from her slumped position and laid her straight in her chair. The second blanket went around her, tucked in at the sides. The bright orange stood out sharply against the dim blues and reds of the emergency lighting. I should have turned back, I told them both. I should have known better. I returned to my seat, the simple task having drained what little energy I had. Through the viewport, only dark water was visible now. The external lights were still functioning, but barely, casting weak beams that disappeared into the blackness. Occasionally, tiny bioluminescent creatures drifted past like ghostly visitors, their blue-green glow pulsing as they went about their business, indifferent to our tragedy. A jellyfish-like creature, no bigger than my hand, pressed against the glass for a moment before pushing away with gentle undulations. Its tentacles left faint trails of light in the water. The Atalanta must have noticed our absence by now. Our check-in was 6 hours ago. They would be organizing a search after 2 missed communications. They'd be tracking the emergency beacon signal. All I had to do was stay alive until they found me. I checked the oxygen levels on the console. The numbers kept dropping steadily. By my estimate, I had maybe 3 hours remaining before the levels became too low to sustain consciousness. After that, I pushed the thought away. 3 hours should be enough time. It had to be. Water continued to seep in through the cracks in the hull. There was nothing I could do about it. At this depth, the pressure would eventually crush us completely. The only question was whether I'd run out of air first. From somewhere in the distance, I heard it. A deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the water and the metal hull of the Nereus. The Kronosaurus was still thrashing against its stony trap. The sound came again, more desperate this time. I imagined its massive body twisting, those powerful jaws snapping as it fought to free itself. "Stay where you are," I muttered. Time passed strangely in the cold, dark cabin. I drifted in and out of awareness, my thoughts growing fuzzy as the oxygen levels continued to drop. The water around my feet had risen to mid-calf, but I couldn't feel my feet anymore. The cold had numbed them completely. I thought of Jamie at UCLA, studying marine biology like Becky had. What would she think when she learned what had happened? And my son, following her to college next year. Would they understand why I'd taken this job? Why I'd risked so much for a paycheck? The money seemed meaningless now. The thrashing sounds from the Kronosaurus grew less frequent and weaker. Maybe it was weakening, or maybe it was saving its energy for one last attempt to escape. I jerked awake from a half-sleep. Something had changed. A light, not from the Nereus, pierced the darkness outside. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. Was I hallucinating? No. There it was again, stronger this time. A beam of white light cutting through the black water. I pressed my face against the viewport, ignoring the cold of the glass against my skin. The light grew brighter, split into 2 beams, then 4. A shape took form behind the lights, the sleek outline of a rescue submersible. "They found us," I whispered, my voice cracking. The rescue sub maneuvered closer, its lights illuminating the broken form of the Nereus. I could see people inside their craft, pointing and gesturing. One of them spotted me through the viewport and raised a hand in acknowledgement. I raised mine back, a wave that took more effort than it should have. As they drew near, I wondered if anyone would believe my story. A living Kronosaurus, a creature that should have been extinct for millions of years, was hunting us in the depths. Would they think I had hallucinated from lack of oxygen, or that the pressure had driven me mad? Would they even find evidence of the creature, or had the collapsed vent buried it completely? I had become the sole survivor of an encounter with a living fossil, a nightmare from Earth's prehistoric past. The thought left me feeling strangely isolated, as if I'd returned from a journey to another time. The rescue sub positioned itself alongside the Nereus. Through the viewport, I watched as divers exited their vessel and swam toward us, carrying equipment. They attached bright yellow cables to strategic points on the Nereus's hull, preparing to tow us up. One diver approached my viewport and placed a gloved hand against the glass. I pressed my palm to match theirs, separated by inches of transparent barrier. The simple human connection brought tears to my eyes. I watched the rescue team secure the damaged Nereus for retrieval. I knew my life would never be the same after this. I had seen something impossible, lost my crew, and survived against the odds. Whatever came next, debriefings, investigations, Nothing would change what I had witnessed in those depths. The lights from the rescue sub fully illuminated the cabin now, casting the wrapped forms of Becky and Ryder in stark relief. I would have to account for their deaths, explain to their families what had happened. The truth would sound like madness, but I owed them that much at least. A metallic tapping came from the hull, the divers signaling they were ready to begin the ascent. I raised my hand in acknowledgement, though I wasn't sure they could see me. The Nereus shifted slightly as tension was applied to the cables. We were going home, going.